I'm just sharing how I use storytelling with my students. So I call it the Building Bridges Welcoming Stories Project. And interestingly enough, 1 year we were part of a program with First Person American, and we called it What's Your Story? And similarly, they were documenting digital stories, people sharing their welcoming stories, which I'll explain in a minute. And so I've kind of melded those two projects into one called the Building Bridges Welcoming Stories Project. And so a little background. I'm repeating this, but you can, if you click on that link later, and if you haven't had a chance to watch the video, that was like the earliest iteration of this project back several years ago. And Not in Our Town made a film about it. But more recently, last spring, we did this project, and I had my students write their immigration stories along with the story of a person who welcomed them when they got here. So somebody who helped them adapt, and then an action that they took to pay it forward. So I'll explain those steps. And I'll just give a little background also that that we were interestingly visited by the then U.S. ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power. She worked under Barack Obama, great woman, written many books. She's one of my heroes. And she was coming to my class to talk about her work with refugees. And so there's a photo of Samantha Power sharing her work with refugees with my students. And there are some links, a blog post my student wrote about that visit, and then videos and lessons that Facing History and Ourselves created about that work. And yes, the links will always be live. They're live in the PowerPoint. But so I decided to, in preparation for Samantha Power's visit, have my students share their stories with her. And we turned that into a book, and they were digital as well as a physical book. So step one was their journey. So there were three components to what they did. And so first thing was a really simple guided free write in class about their story coming to the United States. And I gave them about an hour in class to write freely with a lot of prompts that they could either continue writing on or not. And all of those are in the Dropbox folder. And then they took those journal entries and developed them further, and came back, and we kept meeting. I kept reserving the library because it has those nice big tables. And so we'd come back and be in writing groups, and students would share each draft of their story. So you see in this photo, the students sharing their first drafts with each other, eagerly listening. And then step two was about a welcoming person. So this was a specific person who welcomed them, helped ease their transition to the United States, made them feel at home. And it could have been a person in their family. Some of them talked about people they met at school. Some of them talked about teachers. Some of them talked about coaches. It really varied. Questions like, do you still keep in touch with this person? What did they do? What do you remember about them? If you could reach out and talk to them, what would you say? And in this photo here, you see one of Samantha Power's colleagues who came to kind of vet out my class. There were a lot of steps to getting her to actually come, and he's sharing his story. It was really great. You see how eagerly the kids were responding, and to each other and to him. There was a lot to talk about. He was talking about his parents' experience coming to the United States. And then step three was to pay it forward. So the students actually went out and did a welcoming action. So they used their experience as a newcomer at one point in the United States by being welcoming to someone else. So it could have been a new student in our school. It could have been a new person in their community, a new family member who just came to this country. And they did what they wished somebody had done for them. And then they went out and did that. Interestingly, there were a lot of people who helped students on their first day in gym class. Apparently that can be very traumatic for some students, especially the girls, and figuring out how to use the locks. So a lot of students talked about that. But anyway, they went out and did the action, and then they wrote about who it was, how they helped them, what they gained from the experience. This all took place in my human rights class, which is all about taking action in the community. So it really fit into that model anyway. And here you see another day, students sharing their welcoming action. They were really proud of themselves. It was a really tangible way to feel like they made a difference. One student said, "It feels great when I see someone can do well with my assistance, and it makes me feel useful since I can truly help someone. I believe that people's caring for other people is the bond that connects everybody, and it makes a society of harmony. I believe he will do the same kind of things for students who come to school afterward." And that was from my student from China. And as I mentioned, so we met in these weekly groups where we shared and refined our stories, and students did numerous drafts, each time making sure that they showed, not told. So answering who, what, where, when, why, how, having a hook, being as descriptive as they possibly could. And so you see them again, these constant rounds of sharing. It was really powerful that they not only wrote their own stories, but they were each other's editors. And in terms of final outcomes, so we shared the stories in class. We created a physical book. Every student got a copy. We had a book signing party. We also had a digital version, which we shared with organizations we work with, like the Anti-Defamation League, Not in Our Town, Facing History in Ourselves. And Not in Our Town actually created something that they called Welcoming Month, which was so exciting. So this took place in September, and every day of the month, they featured a different student's stories. That link is live there. And they also paired it with films that they've created or support around immigration and things related. So that was really powerful. And that was a nice way to create a larger audience for these stories. And so again, just reflecting on how this benefited us, took students through the writing process, taught students how to show and not tell in their writing, taught them how to create several drafts of writing, building tangible community service into a writing project with the welcoming action, and again, giving students an opportunity to learn from and with each other. And then for larger benefits, so we're educating the world now about our students' incredible stories, building a bridge between immigrants and their new communities. Again, I keep repeating this, it's so important. Breaking stereotypes about who immigrants are and why they come. Giving students a chance to document their journey while it's still fresh in their minds. I don't know if you saw my earlier presentation, but Dory Katz, the Holocaust survivor who wrote a book about her story, talks a lot about how it took her 30 years to write her story. And by that time, she had forgotten a lot of details and many people were not alive anymore. And one year when she came to my class, she actually talked to the students about how important it is to share their stories now while it's really fresh in their minds. Because it's creating this primary source historical document. It's also creating part of their legacy that they can share with their children later on. And it empowers and inspires students. And then there's that added step of making it digital, and then documenting it and housing it in Minneapolis with that wonderful resource there. So that's a great other step that I will definitely add in. And so again, if you have questions, you can email me. I know we're going to do a Q&A.
Hi, thanks. Well, it's a privilege to speak to both you, Julie and Elizabeth. It's great to see you guys both again.
Hi.
I felt like your presentations were both powerful and empowering, as evidenced in the chat boxes. So I really thank you for all your hard work and for being here and sharing it with us today. I did have a few questions for you, and I welcome those in the chat box as well. I'll try to pick out some that come along. So please direct your questions to Elizabeth and Julie as they come up. One of my questions, and it's always kind of something that you kind of have to feel out giving your group that you're working with in terms of digital storytelling on immigration stories, is being very aware and sensitive to your students, right? So they might have varying immigration statuses. They might be dealing with forced migration. They might not remember, if you're doing immigration history, for example, they might not remember when they came or when someone in their family came. So there's no one answer for all this, but knowing that, what are some ways that both of you have worked with and around the sensitive issues that come up when telling either your own personal immigration story or maybe someone in your family, etc.?
Who would you like to start?
Elizabeth, do you want to start?
Big mouth. Okay. So there's a couple things for us. I mean, first of all, we're here in Minnesota, where we have, say, a smaller immigrant population than other states, but a much higher percentage of all the immigrants in the state are refugees. So we're acutely aware of issues like privacy and trauma as we do our work. And that was one of the reasons why, when we said you can make a story about anything, you can really make a story about anything, because we didn't want people to feel obligated to tell us about the worst experience of their life. There were some people who did want to share an extraordinary difficult story, especially a lot of elders we work with, because they said, I want this story to be remembered. But for other people, no. And I say, those are not the only stories worth telling. And a lot of times for us, just given the culture here, it does take some conversations in the classroom, because people feel like, well, it's the tragic, really difficult story that's the one that matters. Same thing working with students and saying, even if you weren't the one to migrate, or you came when you were 3, you still have an important story to tell too. And we give them the option, if you want to talk to your parents and tell their story, you can, but you have a story that's worth telling and worth remembering. So it's giving people space to do that. Also just being aware as a facilitator or a teacher, when someone wants to tell a story and then it just becomes very difficult, saying, it's okay, you can tell a story about something else. We totally understand that. Another piece of this is one of the many reasons why we don't require anyone to share their story with us when they're done. I've had some tremendous stories, but people say, my mom is not comfortable with us out in public. I've had stories where I said, this is a great story, I'm glad you want to share it, but it sounds like you have a relative in another country who will be in danger if someone watches this video. I would rather take it, you keep it at home, and it's an important story to pass on, but we don't need to put it out in public. And then we give people the option. So I have, in our collection, I have very few stories from people who are undocumented. The few I do have are people who had DACA status. And that's just going to be how the collection is. I mean, there's a really important part of making the story, and sharing it is important too, but it's not more important than someone's, health or safety of them or their family members.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah. Julie?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. And I would just add that I'm in a different position, because I'm a classroom teacher and I'm working with a small group of students, and it really, I'm repeating myself, but it's about building community. It's about building trust. It's about making space. And I always make space for students to pass. So, again, the book that we created last term, when Samantha Power was coming, nobody passed. But the film that I shared, there were 2 students in particular who, when we talked about doing the project, initially said, there's no way I'm sharing my story. One had lost her father. Another was coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and his father was murdered. And they were both adamant that they didn't want to share their story. And I said, that's fine. You don't have to. And then after developing a relationship with their buddy and seeing that there was somebody who was really interested in their story, they decided they wanted to share their story. And in fact, one of them made a film. So I just feel that it's about building community. It's about creating a safe space. It's about making space. It's about giving options, and that it's something. This is not something you do in a day.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I do over a semester or over a year, and so it's not a one-off.
Right, exactly. Thank you so much for answering those questions so well. I did have, one of the things I like about this webinar is that people are coming from all over the country, and you guys, one's in New York and one's in Minnesota. So I'm asking, I don't know the answer, but I'm wondering if you guys work with any local partners or community members to either generate, some sort of showcase of student stories or help in writing student stories. Are there different networks that you tap into? Because what I'm wondering if, people will hear about these different community networks that you tap into in your respective communities, and then they can look into their respective communities and go, oh yeah, I didn't think about this group.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned them. I work really closely with a lot of organizations, but I mean, they're national. So Facing History in Ourselves, Not in Our Town, Not in Our Schools, the Anti-Defamation League. I partner with all of these organizations, and they've been very supportive. And then when work is completed, it's pretty widespread. And actually, one year, the year that I worked with First Person American, and we created both a book, and we made a book, and then there were all of these films created. They were shown at Ellis Island, which was really incredible. That was amazing. That doesn't always happen, and I live in New York. So, but these organizations are national and they're interested. And so, yeah.
Right. Can you speak to some of the different, digital storytelling is obviously a different and just as worthwhile a medium as putting together a collection of handwritten books, which, Julie, you spoke about having done your Building Bridges project. For teachers who may be a little hesitant on the tech side, can you describe any or offer any tips for getting started?
For getting started on the tech side, or just narrative
on the tech part of that? Yeah.
Well, I think I would encourage a teacher to download our curriculum, just leaf through it, and to see the way we've broken things down, because we've spent a lot of time thinking about what works, what doesn't, falling on our face, editing it a little bit, and saying, okay, here are like the 5 techniques you need to teach a student. And then from there, if they have the drive or they have the experience, they can do really fancy things. But you as a teacher are not responsible for going to film school on top of everything you're already juggling. And for us, the writing stage is always the most important part. So the tech thing should come in later, but it shouldn't take over the project. And that's why we do things like, say, we recommend an audio-only voiceover and still images, because in the end, it's a lot easier. There's just too many things that can go wrong when you are recording on video, or just bad quality. And these videos don't have to be perfect, but I want a student to feel really good about what they produce, because their stories are important. That's part of the respect that we try to show everyone who participates with us. So I think we found a really great way to make it simple and available. But you know what? I talk to teachers and I talk to community programs all the time, and I say, look, I love what we do. It's a lot of time in the classroom to do it. It'll be a couple weeks of a project. So if it doesn't work, then write a personal narrative and add a photo. That it doesn't have to be all bells and whistles all the time. I think digital storytelling is a great option, especially if you want your students to work on digital literacy and technology and computer literacy skills, multimedia writing as part of what they're doing. But it's not the only way to do it. And I have lots of books in my office of similar projects where students, high school, adult learners, wrote their own stories, published them, and they're very powerful for us too.
Yeah, I like that idea. You're not aiming for perfection. You're aiming to get the story out there. That's very good to hear. Julie, any more thoughts or ideas to close up our discussion?
No, I don't. Our school's technology is so faulty that I wouldn't commit to doing digital fully. I'm always happy to bring it in when I can, but yeah.
The one last, yeah. So I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Okay.
The one thing I would add with digital stories, if you're worried about technology and cell phone is okay to use in your particular school, there are a couple apps that you could always play around with too, like WeVideo or Little Bird Tales as well, depending on the grade level. But it's been, I know we have a schedule to keep up with, and it's been another fantastic day, and I really enjoyed speaking with both of you and some great ideas that you shared. Thank you.